I'm excited to be here today with Ben Farrell, the Global CEO of CIPS, to talk about procurement, where it's at today, where it's moving to, the impact of AI, and all of these things. Really excited to be here. Thank you, Ben.
Great to be here.
I think before we get on to CIPS and start talking about procurement, I'd love you to actually talk a bit about yourself and your earlier career. And I know you will do this in a very humble way, but I would love you to tell everyone where it started for you and also how you got an MBE aged 29 years old.
Thanks, Ben. Good to be here. And gosh, it's always difficult to know where to start. So after university, I went to the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst and joined my regiment, the Irish Guards, and then had a career that lasted 23 years in the army. And during that time, I went to lots and lots of exciting places that your mother would not want you to go around the world, doing all sorts of things that were fantastically exciting. Actually, my son, who's 21 now, he keeps thinking he wants to join the army. And people always ask me, what do you think about this? I literally do every day again. You know, it was an amazing experience. Anyway, so my career started in Berlin, and then I spent time in throughout the Balkans, Bosnia, Kosovo, then into Iraq and Afghanistan. I went to Iraq 19 times through that period of time, and then I commanded the Irish Guards, became a colonel in the army, and left after having had a brilliant time, really. And it was really because I had a young family, and it was putting a great deal of pressure on the family, and my wife has a good career as well, and so we decided I had to do something, and her was grown up, and it was trying to find something else. So yeah, I embarked on a career in business thereafter. And in regards to your question about my MBE, was in Kosovo when we went into Kosovo, and I went ahead of the NATO main body with some guys from the special forces, and our job was to negotiate the arrival of the forces, the NATO forces in Kosovo, and make the arrangements with the Serbian army that they would roll back as we rolled in. And then I spent 4 months living with the guerrilla forces in Kosovo, and it was fantastic. And I keep in touch with some of those guys as well to this day.
It's definitely not the normal route we're used to hearing. A lot of people say, "Oh, I just fell into procurement. This wasn't a fun." But I don't think it's usually that background.
No, I actually did a master's, weirdly enough, through the Military College of Science, and part of that was around procurement. And defence procurement is literally the most difficult thing in the world. I was in New Zealand recently at the Department of Defence, talking about the integration of a helicopter with digital platforms and missiles, weapon systems. It's incredibly difficult. I mean, often it goes wrong. You've seen this shocking story of what's going on with Ajax, which is the new armoured vehicle that the British Army is having real problems getting into service now. So it's really, really complex. But that was my sort of background and how I got into it. So yeah, I worked in the MOD for a while, trying to match ambition with money, and there was always loads of ambition and never enough money. It's really
typical story.
Organizational story, isn't it? Yeah.
And if you reflect now on, I mean, CIPS it's so funny. It's such a different world, and we were talking about the stress and the pace of the industry right now.
Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot's being thrown at you as the CEO of CIPS, and we need to get on to what CIPS does, by the way, for those that don't know. But are there parallels? Like, it feels like a completely different world you've just discussed. I've never had an answer anything like that when I ask about background, right?
Yeah.
But are you using the same skill set to any degree that you learned back then?
Completely. Gives you great perspective. And obviously, that I've been a student of leadership all my life. Literally, when we went to the Royal Military Academy, you start learning about leadership. And I've been fascinated and studied relentlessly and observed and watched, and I always feel that there's always more to learn. So that has been brilliant. And like the philosophy that sits within the army is so misunderstood, and people think it's about people shouting at people and bossing them around. It's actually completely the reverse. It's about people being really, really thoughtful about what they're trying to achieve and empowering people to get on with it. So when you think about the scale of an army, for example, and you can't control it, it's actually much better when it's not controlled, but people understand what you're trying to achieve. And when I think about CIPS, global organization, when I think about that philosophy that sits within it, saying, hey, as long as everybody knows what we're trying to achieve, they're fully empowered. They know their markets better. They know their jobs better than me. So it's literally my job is to create freedom for people to act with freedom. Yeah. So that is really a brilliant philosophy. There's clearly massive differences along the way.
I'm sure there. Yeah, we could talk.
I remember when I left the army, I went to John Lewis, and It was so different. I didn't even clock how different it would be. I think I took my uniform off one day, put a suit on, and went into the office, and I thought, God, how hard this can be. And my first event was a sort of it was a council meeting, and it was a chance, because it's a co-owned business, for the employees to express their concerns. And the first thing on the agenda was the lack of decaffeinated coffee in the dining room. I thought, this is going to kill me.
Which is probably the sign of a not well-run business. If that is coming up, that's probably not a good sign.
Anyway,
I dread that ever comes up at Omnia. So let's, maybe before we get too deep into this, could you just tell us a bit about, if somebody doesn't know, what is CIPS, who are you, how's it growing?
CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, it's the globe's professional body for procurement and supply chain as a profession. And what does that mean? It means we set the global standards. We have a set of global standards which define the career and stages within that career. And the origins of CIPS. So back in 1932, the United States introduced tariffs on steel imports. And nearly 100 years later, we're having the same conversation. But in 1932, a group of businessmen in the steel industry in the United Kingdom then said, well, this protection of the US needs to be sought through. And so they gathered together and created essentially a trade body that is about professionalizing and developing an understanding of how to best operate within a trade environment. So that's the origin of CIPS and the origin of procurement, really, as a profession. So that's where it came from. And today we have an extraordinary organization really stretched across the globe. So we have our members, tens of thousands of them in 180.
What is the rough membership now? How
about
global is it?
80,000.
80,000, right.
And we have members in 180 countries. The latest branches since January have been 9 additional branches in India. So we started, I don't know why we hadn't been in India much sooner, but the fastest growing economy in the world, the seventh largest GDP, and it's growing ahead of everybody else. So we've opened an office in Delhi, and it's caught fire. They want to professionalize and they want to get on with things.
It's interesting, you're growing, CIPS is a growing business or a growing professional body within, a growing industry. We've just been talking so much about why procurement's growing right now. And I would just want to double click on that, because a lot of the chat we're having today is about AI as a driver. But I've heard you talk a lot about all these other reasons procurement is so right. Could you talk a bit about why is the space seeing such transformation?
Thanks a lot, because we've started this thing called The Great Conversation, which is about moving the conversation on about procurement and really defining the future of the profession, because I keep saying to everybody, the stars have aligned for this profession. And here are the stars that come immediately to mind. Geopolitical, risk and disruption. If you looked at the political and economic uncertainty index, which is a tracker of impact of disruption, the frequency and impact of disruption is growing more and more year by year, post really 2008. And so the economic index says the global supply chain has been continually and more deeply disrupted. So that is being managed by the procurement supply profession. And reliability of supply and resilience and those sorts of questions are ever more in boards' minds. And so they're turning to the chief procurement officers and supply chain leaders saying, what's going on? How are we going to get certainty out of this level of disruption? So there's more and more responsibility being put at the leaders' feet to manage. On top of that, there's sustainability in the agenda. And, we run this amazing survey, which we've just had back, the state of procurement and supply globally. And the number of CPOs who are reporting into the CEO has doubled in the last year. So I was always a bit thinking, well, we've got a job here to elevate the profession within organization. That is happening. So in 2025, our survey said 14%. In 2026, it said 33%. So we had doubling of the level of influence that procurement leaders are having in their organizations, which is profoundly interesting and important as it reflects the growth of it. Partly because I think the nature of business has massively changed. I was looking at the S&P 500 and the amount of spend internally versus externally since 1950. So virtually nothing in 1950 typically, and now 70% of their spend is external. And that means, we're talking a bit about the supply base, digital supply base, physical supply base, whatever it is. Essentially, organizations are a collection of organizations working together for success and outcome. And increasing the procurement leaders are the orchestrators of this massive network of people working collaboratively, trying to create collective success. And that is the changing nature of business. And when you look at the leaders of business, like guys like Tim Cook leading Apple, Apple is basically a massive procurement operation, and his background is procurement and supply chain. So the nature of business, whether it's Temu, Alibaba, General Motors, these are all led by procurement people, because this is the nature of the business we're going into. And the skills that we teach about supplier relationship management, contract management, the developing of those sorts of things are the skills that are relevant to the business world that we're now stepping in. You were describing a lot of that when you were presenting earlier. So these are the skills that are coming in. On top of that, I think a couple of other things. Demographics. So the world that we are going to live in by 2050 is going to have 9.7 billion people, up from 8 billion today, and 70% they're going to live in urban environments. If you think about the pressure on water, food, electricity, raw materials, they've got to be procured and actually even recycled and moved. So all of that is on procurement supply chain leaders to make happen. Against that, an aging population and the facilitation of that and the efficiency needed to reflect that. If you look at the demographics, particularly in the global north, a shrinking working population with a growing older population means we've got to do this really well, otherwise it's totally unaffordable. So you start to line up these things, you put climate next to it as well. There's massive responsibility that now sits with procurement as a profession. And then AI is enhancing our ability to look at this really effectively.
And before, I want to do the AI chat too, but I think it's interesting, you just talked about climate change there, and this is something I wasn't going to discuss today, but if we'd had this chat a few years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago, ESG would have been the key theme, not AI. And obviously there's been a technological shift, but I remember there was a time, I think Trump referred to climate change as a sort of radical left garbage or something. And obviously the world's changed a lot, and it's probably less of a driver now in procurement. I'm just curious, I think it still resonates in Europe, the ESG driver of procurement. What's your global view on that? Is it still...
No, it's fascinating. We had a summit on it this morning with Anthesis, who are our sort of sustainability partner. We just started to work with them. And I thought about it, and I have been in Africa a lot this year, and India, as I mentioned. I was so surprised. Someone said to me, when you go to India, you'll find it's not part of the agenda. So they didn't even bother talking to them about it. It was almost the most prevalent thing that came up in conversation. So interesting. Africa, I was in Nigeria, and they said, we need to worry about our sustainability. In Saudi Arabia, they are so committed. So I honestly have got to the position where I think that we're beginning to have a hollow rhetoric here about our obligations and fulfilling our obligations. People care about it massively. I spend a lot of time with, I suppose, younger people entering professional life, and they're very, very motivated by the idea of value. Not commercial value instead of cost, but the general value, and including values and how people behave, ethical standards, and the environment. And I think that's really coming through. So whatever Mr. Trump has to say, I think most of the rest of the world are not there at the moment, and I can see it's coming back. And a lot of the responsibility is because of supply chains are responsible for 90% of global emissions. Just,
that's where it is. We interview a lot of sort of young and hungry people at Omnia, and I'd say, if we refer to just Gen Zs as a collective there, it's definitely something on their agenda. So it's a weird disconnect right now between some of the leading governments, particularly obviously in the US, we're talking about specifically, and what actually the rhetoric is from the wider population. So hopefully things revert back for the sake of the world to some degree.
And there's one other thing I should say on the stars line, which comes up quite a lot. Often people say to me, where's the best place for the procurement leaders to sit within a business? And so we track that over time as to whom they report. And so typically in the last 3 years, there's been a massive change from reporting to the CFO to not only reporting directly to the CEO, but outside the finance function. So we've seen this reduce massively. So 75% of CPOs do not report into the finance function anymore. Yeah, so that's changed in 3 years. So we had it at 47% in 24, and that's migrated. So all of those things, because when you think about what we're describing here, is almost like a chief operating officer job with all those things that are coming together. Because you can imagine the stage when basically businesses are, in their own way, massive procurement operations.
Yeah, and I think let's get on to AI, because I think that's one of the drivers too. We were just talking about if there are two companies now, one's procuring the right AI technologies quickly and the other is not, you know which one's going to win.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, the gap is widening. Do you, I think a lot of procurement people I speak to, sadly, are still viewing AI predominantly as a threat because it can automate a lot of the manual work that has been done by procurement to date. How do you view that? Because I think there's two angles. Is it an opportunity? Is it a threat? And then if there's procurement leaders out there today looking at the skills they need to learn to make best use of it or become more relevant, what would you advise them on?
I love it. And I've noticed the narrative has changed actually in the last 18 months for people to be much more forward-leading and excited about the prospect. Someone said yesterday, and I love it, this is doing all the jobs a human should never have done, you know, in it liberating us to do all the sort of, make the judgments, make human connections, manage and relate to all the supply base that I was talking about, creating success with human relationships. When we had this amazing webinar, response to the war in Iran, we had 2,500 people from 104 countries talking, and we said, right, we're going to get this best panel together. I was opening a conversation about how did you, respond to this, what was your supplier relations, about force majeure contracting. What was so interesting is the guys are saying, well, our supplier success is our success, and the people who didn't have a mature or even know their supply base were getting walloped and thinking, actually, when we know the nature of business is about many, many organizations creating collaborative success, actually being able to relate to that and manage that, that is where the success lies in the future. And so AI, doing a lot of the manual work, as it were, is liberating us to think about this and think about how we orchestrate success in a different way. And also, I love the idea of a bit like Netflix, and you'll know way more than this. If I put my choices in of what I want to procure and the dimension of that, whether it's the sustainability obligation, I feel the time, all the sorts of things we'd worry about in procurement, and it can serve up choices to me like a bit like Netflix. And every day I can say, do you know what? The supply base in that particular nation is at risk, and it's now serving up choices elsewhere in the world. I'm describing what I call the supply web now, moving away from a supply chain. So you've got this great web, and choices are coming, and that is a brilliant thing. And so the job then is to make judgments about what's the best outcomes based on this amazing set of information I've got. But the caveat, we have this conversation all the time around CIPS and our branches and all the events, but it's really clear that the data sets people have got are just not good enough to be really confident at. We put some work on UK procurement spend into ChatGPT, into Claude and Copilot, and asked the same question, got 3 different answers.
Yeah.
Do you know what? So there's some way to go on the certainty.
Data behind it.
But in a way, you can then apply judgment to say you've got a sort of a window of views and perspectives. But yeah, I think more and more people think it's exciting. It's not going to take people's jobs. It's going to give them different and better jobs.
Yep. Okay. So sort of the upskilling side of that.
Yeah.
The other thing I think is interesting in this, I think if you look at procurement now, it's one of the key functions of a business being totally rewritten, almost to the degree that it would be easier if we could change the word because it's stigmatized.
I'm looking for that word. I literally, we've started this great conversation, the global dialogue about the future of the profession. And twice, yesterday, someone said to me, should we rename? I said, we're completely open-minded. And I'm trying to corral, professional bodies who are national professional bodies around the world to be part of this conversation to say, after a while, it's not the right name because it's doing so much more
stuff. Yeah. I think the breadth side of it's key. But it's often a misunderstood function. And particularly, say we were to sit in a room of CFOs who, for the most part, in the businesses I speak to, still seem to manage procurement. Whether that's right or wrong, that's probably still a norm. What's sort of the most misunderstood? I think a lot of these people are seeing it as a savings driving function. What do you think is the most misunderstood aspect of it today?
I think partly that. And I suppose because people put it in a function, that you get the outcome of the function. So the CFO's looking at the money and the numbers and then driving the team to do that. And
what would you say? What are they missing though? If you're trying to convince that CFO, you're missing the point.
Yeah.
How would you explain to them what they're actually missing out on?
Yeah. So I spent a bit of time with amazing number of CPOs. And I was saying you sit along the slide, the CEO, and make sure that you're helping define the business objectives and the enablement of those objectives through sensible procurement, as opposed to saying, this is what we've got. Don't be the recipient of tasks from other people.
Yeah.
create the success of the future by defining what that might look like and helping understand how you achieve your business objectives. And that could be with supplier relationships, make versus buy choices. And you can really operate at a different level than being the recipient of the challenge the CFO's got to hit the numbers. So, and that's what worries me when people say, well, I report to the CFO, because you get a slightly binary outcome. It's not an entirely fair comment for everyone, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, we definitely see
And you
that.
definitely see a migration away from that now. You definitely see that. Yeah.
And do you, the other, there's a couple of things I want to cover here. One is it would be great to get some practical advice. I think most procurement people I speak to say, oh, I fell into this career track, doing this, I'm now doing procurement. Many are very passionate about it, but nonetheless, they didn't know about it early on in their careers. How are you, I suppose, improving the brand and the image of it, but also lobbying so more people have heard of it and more people choose that career choice?
Yeah. Great questions and on my mind. So in reverse order, what is so exciting, in the UK, we made a bit of a breakthrough that procurement is now in T levels. So at school, you will, for the very first time, there's part of the syllabus which talks about procurement and what
What's
it
a
is,
T-level?
which is a GCSE. Yeah, so it's a technical level,
Okay.
and it's sort of, so it's in the national syllabus,
Right.
which is a step forward. So all the indicators of why the profession is becoming super relevant are starting, to show up in different places, which I think is fantastic. So historically, people could have reasonably said to me, CIPS is a qualifying body, which it clearly is. We're regulated by Ofqual and we can give people professional qualifications, but we're turning it into a partner for life. So we start with engagement at the youngest age, and then we know we've started to create continuous development and learning right the way till people are CEOs and chairmen. So we've started, for example, we've got the CPO to CEO course now, where I'm saying businesses need the skills that everyone's got. We need to help people bridge the gap between, CPO and CEO through different types of learning, whether softer skills and all sorts of good things. And we're reversing that right the way through everybody's life. So the youngest age, so we're going to help develop all those sorts of things. So we want to be alongside people throughout their professional development, and that's what we're going to do. And so part of this great conversation is to hear where people want us to concentrate to some extent, and then be able to make sure the learning and the skills development is all there for them to do that. So we're excited to be able to do that. And I know I need to take the conversation outside the procurement profession, because we can have an amazing and exciting conversation and love it. I go around the world and people love procurement, and they genuinely do. And I find people who literally said, changed my life, I fell into it, but I would never dream of doing something else. And then have the fabulous echo chamber. And I think the big job in 2027 for us as the professional body is talk to the professional bodies of lots of other different, professions and all over the world, and explain it. Because when I talk about 4 decades of globalization and a weaponized supply chain that's impacting nations and the fragility of semiconductors, people don't really understand it. And in America, I'm not sure if they understood their supply chain, whether they had imposed tariffs. The most popular car in America, the Ford F-150, 45% of the component parts came from outside America. So they're now paying much more for the most popular car in America because they probably didn't understand what they were procuring. So do you know what I mean? We've got a big job to expose that to the world. And so we're going to have this amazing, great conversation within, by the way, there are 13.5 million people on LinkedIn with procurement supply in their job titles. So that is, and it's growing at 10% a year. So all the indicators, whether it's the school syllabus, people on LinkedIn, all the indicators, this profession is super relevant. We got to let other people outside know.
Understand.
Yeah.
Maybe if we go to the other side of this question, if there are people listening to this who are, I suppose, looking to benefit from CIPS, there are 2 categories I think I'll ask you about here. One is, let's say, somebody who's young and hungry, looking for that career track and trying to find the right opportunities. And then the flip side is maybe their chief procurement officers looking to build out their teams with the next generation and that modern mindset. How can CIPS support in that situation?
I suppose there's the obvious way. We've got the sort of training, development, education side where people can go on to qualify, and we're adjusting learning pathways, not to be too nerdy on the description of it, because we know that artificial intelligence can help people learn in a bespoke way, and lots of clever stuff around how we help people absorb information and develop professionally as well. So we've got a standard. We're saying that if you employ someone, they're going to be at this standard. And more organizations like the United Nations are saying, we're not going to employ people who are not CIPS qualified, because we need to spend money responsibly and effectively. We need to worry about our ESG agenda. We need to worry about cyber risk, and we need to help people really take a holistic view of their role and responsibilities. And that's our job. And then outside of that sort of capacity development, we are also very involved in what could broadly be called consultancy, and we do organizational skills gap analysis, organizational development. And so we have a very big part of the organization is building capacity within teams across the world, and we're employed in so many massive businesses and governments doing exactly that. So we're doing individual and corporate or public sector development at the same time, and also then our branch network, which is good fun. I swear we've got 700 volunteers across the world who run who run this network. It's extraordinary. And if you move to another country, CIPS is obviously an international designation, and you can join your local branch. You'll probably find a job there. You get a lot of friends there. You find best practice, all the latest thinking. So it's a massive thing, and it's all very, very well connected.
Love it.
Yeah.
I want to finish off with a kind of broader leadership focused question. I've often heard you talk before about the amount you learn in the military. I think I heard the quote, march towards the sound of the guns.
Yeah, this is important then. This is
what would you, I suppose, to the modern executive out there who's trying to position themselves best for their career, let's zoom out of procurement here. What advice would you give people in this age of AI and action and everything moving faster? How can people best position?
So the reason I say march to the sound of the guns, I remember I was an officer cadet at Sandhurst at the Royal Military Academy, and part of the training, one of the generals, who's running the army at the time, came along, and one of the ambitious officers cadets said to him, what's your career advice? And he said, march to the sound of the guns, which is a euphemism, as we know, for going to where the action is. So I genuinely think that's probably the best bit of advice I ever heard. So I forever make your own judgments. I went consciously in the army to where the action was, and I went to whether it was the Balkans or Kosovo, Iraq and Afghanistan, because that's where the action was. And then I thought, well, subsequently, I went to John Lewis at the time when there was a move from bricks and mortar into the digital world. And digital it was massive transformation. And now I think, well, this is what's happening in procurement, and it is where the action is. And honestly, when you put it all together, and I travel the world, I speak to so many people, and everyone's of the same view. So it's an exciting time, and that's my perspective. Is march to the sound of the guns, and
chase the action.
Chase the action, and live your life in a bold way. That chase the action, and it's happening. And I keep saying to people, we had an amazing. One of the things CIPS does remarkably beautifully is the graduation when people get professionally qualified in Peterborough Cathedral. Catherine of Aragon is buried there. It's one of the most spectacular places in the UK. It really is beautiful. And I was saying to them, listen, your timing is perfect. You've qualified, you're ready to go in a profession that is so relevant, but also you just be unbelievably bold. And I think one of the things we can all do collectively is give confidence in the profession to say, believe it, believe what you're doing, because you're defining the prosperity of nations and the success of organizations. And that's what's happening.
Love it. Incredible. Thank you so much for being with us here today. Really appreciate it. This will be a great session.